The world's move on, Arnold, but you're still stuck in the year Nixon resigned. You can let go of 1974 now. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Under the warm blaze of studio lights, the show was already moving at full speed. Bright smiles, polished banner, applause signs flashing just out of frame. But when the camera cut to Whoopi, something shifted. She leaned slightly forward in her chair, eyes narrowed with a grin that didn't quite reach kindness. Arnold Schwarzenegger sat across from her, motionless. The tailored charcoal suit fit him like a frame more than fashion. His hands, thick and worn, rested calmly on his knees. No coffee mug, no note cards, just him and a leather belt coiled neatly on the armrest beside him. "So, Arnold," Whoopi began, tone wrapped in velvet and irony, "you really showed up wearing that old belt again?" The audience chuckled on cue, soft at first, then louder as they looked to her for permission. "What is that from your bodybuilder days? Or was it part of your costume from Conan the Barbarian?" He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. Instead, with a kind of quiet that rewrote the atmosphere of the room, Arnold reached beside him. His fingers closed around the belt. It wasn't flashy. No gold. No designer brand. Just worn leather. Faded almost gray. The edges soft from time. He lifted it slowly, as if the act itself required reverence. The laughter faded. The grin on Whoopi's face thinned just slightly. He turned the belt in his hands, then rolled it over, revealing a single line etched into the inner side, burned in by hand, letters uneven, weathered. The camera caught the inscription just briefly, Gustav Schwarzenegger, 1912-1972. No one said a word. Arnold looked down at the name, then spoke with a voice that seemed pulled from a place deeper than memory. "This belonged to my father," he said, quietly. "He wore it until the day he died. I kept it, not to show off, but because it reminds me who held me upright long before the world saw me stand." The air changed. It wasn't dramatic. No lightning strikes. No music cue. Just a soft silence settling over the room like dust on hardwood. Real. Undeniable. Whoopi opened her mouth, then closed it again. The audience shifted. Some leaned back, some leaned forward. The laughter didn't return. Arnold didn't feel the silence. He just let it breathe, the way old houses breathe when you enter them alone for the first time in years. He placed the belt gently on his lap and looked across the table. Not at Whoopi, but through her, beyond the cameras, past the studio, toward something no lens could capture. "I carried this across the ocean," he said. "Tied it to my gym bag when I had nothing else that felt like home. I wore it when I got rejected from acting school for my accent, when they laughed at my name, when I was told no one would ever take a man like me seriously. Not with this voice, not with that face." He paused, not for effect, for honesty. The host across from him adjusted her seat. Someone backstage whispered too loudly into a headset. The camera operator subtly zoomed in. "I don't wear this to remember pain," he added. "I wear it to remember that I survived it." His fingers moved along the edge of the leather like tracing a scar. Then, finally, he looked at Whoopi, not with challenge, not with resentment, with presence. She met his gaze, her smile flickering like a candle in the wind. "Well," she said, voice lighter than before, trying to regain rhythm. "That got a little heavier than I expected." Arnold gave a slow nod, just once. "Truth usually does," he said. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't applaud. They didn't move. Not yet. It wasn't that they were unsure how to respond. It was that they didn't want to interrupt the stillness. Because for once, daytime television wasn't delivering a moment. It was witnessing one. Whoopi leaned back slightly, eyes falling to the belt in Arnold's lap. He didn't touch it again. He didn't need to. Sometimes history doesn't need a speech. Sometimes it just needs to be seen. And for the first time in that broadcast, Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't a celebrity or a former governor or a movie icon. He was just a son. And in the space between words, in the pause between jokes, that was more than enough. 2 days earlier, the invitation came quietly. No phone call. No fanfare. Just a single email. Subject line plain. The View would be honored to host Mr. Schwarzenegger for a conversation on legacy. That was it. No details. No questions. No warning. Arnold read it twice, then set the phone down on the old oak table near the window. The belt was already there, coiled like it had been waiting. Tony, his longtime assistant, leaned against the doorframe. He didn't speak right away. Just watched Arnold's eyes, the way they narrowed, not in suspicion, but in memory. Tony finally said, "They're not inviting you to talk. They're setting a trap. They want the old version of you. The relic. The headline. They're hoping you flinch." Arnold didn't answer. He rarely did when the air got heavy. Instead, he walked over to the workbench tucked into the far corner of the room. It looked out of place in a house like his. Handmade, stained with sawdust, a relic of his own making. On the bench sat an object wrapped in an old army towel. He opened it carefully, like unwrapping something sacred. Inside was a chair, not a full-size one. A small wooden stool, the kind you'd use to rest between reps in a gym too poor to have real benches. It was uneven, one leg shorter than the rest. The surface was scarred with dents and notches, each one a moment, missteps, starts, restarts. Arnold ran his thumb along one of the deep cuts, just left the center. That one had come from 1983, when the call came in that his father had passed. He didn't cry, didn't sit. He just grabbed a hammer and started building something to stay upright. Tony stepped in, looking at the stool. "You're not thinking of bringing that on set?" Arnold shrugged. "Not yes. No, just emotion. Like the idea wasn't absurd to him. Because it wasn't. They'll laugh," Tony warned. "They'll say you're trying too hard to be meaningful." Arnold picked up the stool, turned it in his hands, then placed it gently on the table beside the belt. "They can laugh," he said, his voice low, steady. "This isn't for them." He moved slowly through the room, gathering a few things with the precision of someone setting a stage not for an audience, but for a reckoning. The stool, the belt, a folded photograph tucked deep in a drawer, black and white, edges curled. A younger version of himself, sitting beside his father outside their home in Austria, both wearing the same belt. That was the last photo before he left for America. Tony watched in silence. He had known Arnold through almost every transformation: bodybuilder, action star, governor, comeback icon. But this version, the one moving to the house like a man collecting pieces of himself, was different. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Tony asked, softer now. Arnold paused at the doorway, one hand on the frame. "I'm not going to perform. I'm going to remind them that pain doesn't disappear when the camera cuts." The next morning, whispers were already circling. Online headlines speculated on the reasons. Damage control? New book? A documentary promo? Some even jokes. Maybe he's finally running for president. Arnold read none of it. He sat in the back seat of a black car, windows up, phone off. The stool was tucked under his arm, the belt coiled in his hand like a promise. Outside, the city looked like every other city before show, restless, distracted, unaware. Billboards flashed faces bigger than buildings. People walked fast, earbuds in, missing moments as they passed. No one noticed a man in the back seat who once symbolized strength but now carried silence as his sharpest edge. He didn't rehearse. He didn't ask for notes. He didn't plan the moment. He planned the truth. The car turned off the main road and pulled behind the studio. Security met them with clipboards and laminated passes. But Arnold didn't stop moving. His shoes hit the pavement with the rhythm of a man who'd walked through rooms far harder than this. War rooms, hospital rooms, empty rooms. A producer greeted him backstage. Young, eager, smiling like the moment might rub off. "Big fan, sir. Just so, you know, the opening segment will be light. A few jokes, some throwbacks. Warm stuff." Arnold gave a small nod. The producer kept talking, voice rising just slightly. "We might touch on the election years, maybe Mr. Olympia, maybe even a little Conan." Arnold turned to face him, not unkind, just final. "Let it happen." The producer blinked. "Sir, no script," Arnold said. No protection. Let it happen. He stepped past him, down the narrow hallway, where posters of past guests lined the walls. Comedians, politicians, actors, influencers, each with a smile, each with polish. Arnold didn't smile. He reached the green room and sat, not in the makeup chair, but on the floor, beside the stool. He placed the belt on his lap, unfolded the photo, and stared at it for a long time. He didn't need courage. He needed honesty. He wasn't here to win. He was here to be unedited. The lights felt brighter this time. Not warmer, not welcoming, just bright, clinical, like an interrogation room with better seating. The music faded. The applause signs flickered, and the host's voice cut to the chatter like a knife wrapped in velvet. Across the table, Whoopi smiled with the same grin she'd worn for decades. It was practice, controlled, engineered for daytime rhythm. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk, tone playful but deliberate. "So, Arnold," she said, tilting her head, "you've been a champion bodybuilder, an action hero, a governor, a little bit of everything, really." A few chuckles rippled across the audience, the kind that wanted to be polite, the kind that waited for the real punchline. Whoopi gave it to them. But bringing a belt and a stool to a talk show? What's next? Wood carving on live TV. Laughter followed, light at first, then louder as permission settled into the room. Arnold sat still. His posture hadn't changed since the segment started. Back straight, hands resting gently over the folded belt in his lap. The stool sat at his feet, not on display, but not hidden. He didn't react. Whoopi continued, trying to land the next jab without seeming cruel. "I mean, it's 2025. That stool looks like it's from before Wi-Fi. And that belt." She pointed with two fingers, a smile tightening. "That's not vintage, Arnold. That's prehistoric." More laughter. Someone clapped. Arnold looked up, slowly. Not rushed, not defensive. His eyes didn't dart. They locked. "Some things don't age," he said quietly, voice steady. "They endure." The laughter stalled. Not ended, just hesitated, like the room realized something had shifted but wasn't sure how to respond. Whoopi blinked. A co-host glanced off camera. The rhythm was off now. Arnold leaned forward slightly, hands never leaving the belt. "Some people bring books. Some bring jokes. I brought what kept me standing when no one else would." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to silence the room. He simply let the words land and settle. Like dust, like memories. Whoopi lifted her chin, trying to reset the tone. "All right, Mr. Terminator getting sentimental on us today. You sure you're not running for president after all?" Another round of chuckles, thinner now, less certain. Arnold nodded once. Not amused, just acknowledging. "I've played a lot of roles," he said, "but the ones that mattered most never had a script." The audience didn't laugh. A few murmured. One man in the front row lowered his phone. The belt in Arnold's hands caught the light, not shining, but reflecting, dull and scarred, like something that had survived more than one kind of war. Whoopi folded her hands on the desk. Her voice lowered, less teasing. "So, what is it about that belt that makes you bring it here? Really?" Arnold looked down. His thumb moved slowly along the burned-in letters inside the leather. Then he spoke, not to Whoopi, not to the audience, but to the room. "My father was a strict man. Hard hands. Hard words. He didn't believe in applause, but he believed in work. He wore this every day, even when he didn't have much left to hold up." He paused, not to dramatize, but because the truth needed space. "When he died, I didn't inherit money. I didn't have some big legacy. I got this." He held up the belt slightly, just enough for the audience to see. "And I carried it across oceans, across years, across every room I was told I didn't belong in. Silence, not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that leans in." Whoopi shifted, her tone softened. "But you're Arnold Schwarzenegger. You've had everything. Fame, power, respect. Why do you still need that?" Arnold looked at her, not unkind, not impressed, just human. "Because I remember when I had none of those things. And that's the version of me that still shows up when the lights go off, when the camera's cut. He's the one that earned all the rest. A quiet hush rolled across the audience. The kind that always comes when someone says something that can't be unfelt. One of the co-hosts looked down at her cue cards, then quietly set them aside. Arnold didn't fill the space. He let it hold. I didn't bring this belt to impress you, he said. I brought it to remind myself that even now, I still carry the weight of where I started. Someone in the third row exhaled audibly, not dramatic, just real. The studio lights didn't dim. The music didn't swell. But something inside the room lowered its volume. Whoopi looked down at the belt, then back at him. Her next words came slower. You think pain is something we should hold on to? Arnold didn't hesitate. No, I think pretending we don't have it is what breaks us. And just like that, the banter was gone. The script was gone. The segment, whatever it was meant to be, had become something else entirely. Not an interview, a reckoning. Arnold didn't move. His hand stayed resting on the belt, his gaze steady, as if waiting for something the room hadn't realized it needed yet. The laughter was gone. The rhythm of the show, broken. No cue cards could fix the silence that had settled. It wasn't dead air. It was alive, stretching, expanding. Then, without a word, he reached down beside his chair. The audience shifted in their seats. The cameras followed with that soft mechanical were only heard when everything else had gone quiet. From beneath the table, Arnold pulled up a small wooden stool. It looked almost too plain for a man like him. No polish, no signature, just wood, dented, scratched, uneven. He placed it in front of him, hands never rushing, like placing something sacred at an altar. This, he said quietly, was the first thing I built when I came to America. The room didn't respond. They didn't know if they were supposed to. I had nothing, he continued. No job, no car, barely any English. But I had my hands, and I had a hammer. So I built this, not because I needed a stool, but because I needed to prove I could build something here from nothing. He let that hang. No music, no lighting change. Just breathe, just time. I sat on it when I signed my first gym contract. When I called my mother to say I wasn't coming back to Austria. I sat on it when I got the call that my son was born. And I sat on it when I found out about my mistakes. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The weight in his voice did the work. People think legacy is about trophies or office walls. But for me, it's this. He tapped the stool lightly. It didn't wobble. It didn't creak. It just stood. Solid. Quiet. Someone in the second row lowered their phone. Slowly. A few others followed. Arnold looked out at the audience now. Not to perform, but to invite. When I got divorced, I didn't give speeches. I came into my workshop and rebuilt this stool because the man who had made it had changed, but who had remembered the first version of me. A woman near the back pressed her hand to her mouth, as if holding something in. Whoopi didn't interrupt. Her hand was resting against her chin now, the cue cards untouched. Her smile was gone, not from anger, but from recognition. Arnold reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photo. He didn't show it to the cameras. He placed it gently on the stool. It was a black and white image, edges curled with time. Father and son, sitting on a porch. One belt, two hands. A smile that barely registered in the frame. But it was there. I brought this because sometimes people forget that pain isn't something you erase. It's something you honor. A man near the front sniffled, trying to do it quietly. He didn't succeed. Arnold's voice stayed level. When my father died, I didn't know how to grieve for him. He wasn't easy. He wasn't gentle. But he built things. He believed in order, in holding things together. And this belt, this stool, they held me together when I thought I'd fall apart. The room was still. So still, it almost felt like the studio had stopped being a studio. Like the lights were no longer there to flatter. Like the stage itself had surrendered to something older than performance. Truth. Then a sound. A chair sliding gently on the floor. Someone stood up. A man, late 60s, maybe older, wearing a denim jacket that looked like it had seen better decades. He wasn't planted. He trembled just slightly. His hands were calloused. His eyes fixed on Arnold. The crew tensed. Producers behind the cameras leaned in. A staffer mouthed the word, "Cut," but no one moved. The director just shook his head. "Let it roll." The man spoke, voice cracked but clear. "I trained in Venice back in the 70s, he said. "Gold's Gym. You used to come in early. You didn't talk much, but you always stayed late. Always stayed to help us nobodies." Arnold didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just listened. "You showed up to my kid's birthday once. He didn't even know who you were. He just thought you were the strongest man he'd ever seen. You didn't correct him. You played with him for an hour, then left without saying a word." The man paused, his voice catching. "My boy died 3 years later. Cancer. He never forgot that day." Silence again, but heavier now. Dense. The man took a breath, forced himself steady. "I came here today thinking it was just a show. Just background noise while the world keeps spinning. But now I see this isn't about you. It's about what people carry. And how sometimes the strongest thing you can do is show it." He sat down. The audience didn't applaud. No one moved. The stool sat between them all now, not as a prop, but as a bridge. Something honest in a room built on polish. Arnold looked down at it, then back up. No tears. No smile. Just stillness. From the left side of the audience, a new sound broke the stillness. It wasn't applause or a camera cue. It was softer. The sound of breath catching in a young man's throat. A pause too sharp to be casual. The kind that makes everyone nearby turn without knowing why. He stood slowly. Early 20s. Hoodie. Sleeves pulled over his palms. Shoulders hunched like he hadn't planned to speak. But something inside him didn't ask for permission. His eyes darted to the exit, then back to Arnold. Fear clung to his voice like static. "I used to believe in something," he said, voice trembling. "God, family, honor. All those things people say are supposed to keep you strong." The room didn't move. The cameras didn't cut. Even Whoopi stayed silent, her eyes locked on him. The young man swallowed. His hands twisted the fabric at the edge of his hoodie. "But then my brother died. Afghanistan. I was 17. One phone call, and suddenly the world stopped making sense. The God part, the honor part, it all felt fake. Like I'd been lied to." His voice broke for a second, just a crack, then came back stronger, not louder, just more certain. "I came here today because my girlfriend made me. She said I needed to stop isolating. Maybe I'd hear something useful on a show like this. I didn't expect anything. I didn't want anything." He looked directly at Arnold. "No performance. Just the truth. But then you talked about that stool, that belt, about building something when you had nothing, about carrying pain without turning it into a costume. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone." Arnold didn't move, but something behind his eyes shifted, just slightly, like a door creaking open from the inside. The young man's voice fell into a whisper. "I don't know if I believe in anything again yet, but right now I kind of want to try." No gasp, no applause, just the raw stillness of a moment too fragile to decorate. Arnold stood. The motion was slow, deliberate. He didn't adjust his suit. He didn't smile. He just walked. 2 rows forward, then stopped. No spotlight followed him. No music swelled. He stood close enough to be heard, but not so close as to overwhelm. He looked the young man in the eyes and said simply, "Then you've already started." The words didn't land like advice. They landed like relief. The young man's legs wobbled beneath him, but he didn't sit. Not yet. His lips pressed together, fighting the weight of whatever had just shifted inside him, around him. People leaned in, not to judge, not to applaud, but to witness. Arnold turned back toward the audience, but his voice stayed close. "I didn't come here to teach," he said. "I came because sometimes pain makes you feel like you're the only one carrying something heavy." He looked around the studio, not as a performer scanning for reaction, but as a man measuring silence. But the truth is, we're all carrying something. Someone in the back row lowered their hands from their face. A woman near the stage touched her wedding ring without realizing it. The kind of gestures people make when memory stirs. Arnold nodded toward the stool. This isn't a symbol of strength, he said. It's a reminder that when everything else fell apart, I built something that held my weight. He stepped back toward his seat. No one moved until he did. Even the camera seemed hesitant to reframe. As he sat, the young man lowered himself too, slowly, carefully, like something sacred had just been exchanged between them. Whoopi didn't speak. Her fingers were wrapped around her glass of water now, not drinking, just holding, like it anchored her. Silence stretched again, not empty, full. Then, from the control room, someone whispered into a headset. A producer leaned into the floor director, asking quietly, "Do we cut? Do we shift topics?" No one gave the signal, because no one wanted to leave the moment. Arnold looked down at his hands. The belt is still resting across his knees. The stool was solid in front of him. The photo is still lying face up. He didn't touch any of it. He didn't need to. The young man, now seated, looked forward, not down. His posture had changed. Slightly straighter. Not transformed, but touched. The air in the studio was no longer performance air. It was something denser. Something lived in. Arnold spoke again, softly, almost like to himself. I never wanted to be a role model. I just wanted to be honest. A pause. And honesty, it hits harder than any punch I ever threw. No one replied. They didn't need to, because for once, the story being told wasn't about greatness. It was about gravity. The moment held, and for a while, no one dared to break it. But silence, no matter how sacred, eventually invites sound. And this one came sharp, wrapped in sarcasm. It came from the host's chair, where Whoopi sat now with a stiffer posture and a voice that didn't quite carry the same comfort it once had. "So what now?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes not matching it. "You come in here with old wood and older stories, and suddenly you're what? A spiritual guide." It wasn't a joke. Not really. But it tried to sound like one. Arnold looked at her, not reacting, not rising to it, just observing. His stillness was its own kind of reply. But she continued, filling the quiet with words that felt less aimed at him and more like a defense against something she couldn't control. "Come on, Arnold. You've made a whole career playing men who don't feel. Men who crush, win, survive. And now you want us to believe that under all that steel, you're just a man sitting on a stool?" There were a few soft laughs in the audience, unsure of their own timing. A reflex. Nervous. Hollow. Arnold didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He let the words settle in the air like dust on old furniture. Then finally he spoke. "I'm not here to be believed," he said quietly. "I'm here because someone out there needed to hear that pain doesn't make you weak." Whoopi crossed her legs, the cue cards back in her hand, though she wasn't reading from them. "It sounds like clinging, Arnold. Like holding on to something just so you still have something." Arnold nodded slightly. Not agreement. Not defiance. Just presence. "Grief doesn't end when the credits roll," he said. "And pretending it does, that's the real performance." That landed. Not loud. Not dramatic. But it's true. Somewhere near the back of the studio, a woman lowered her head into her hands. Quietly. A man 2 rows behind her reached for her shoulder, not as comfort, but connection. Whoopi opened her mouth again, then paused. Her eyes flicked to the belt, still resting across Arnold's lap. The stool. The photo. The atmosphere. "This was supposed to be light," she said, almost under her breath. Arnold looked at her, his face unreadable. Light doesn't mean fake, and truth doesn't always glow. Sometimes it just stays with you like a bruise. The words didn't come with a flourish. They just came, and stayed. For a long second, no one spoke. Then one of the co-hosts, quiet until now, said softly, "He's not wrong." That small sentence shifted something again. Not dramatically, but enough. Whoopi glanced at her, then back at Arnold. Her smile was gone completely. In its place, something smaller. Not surrender, but pause. Arnold leaned forward slightly. I didn't come here to fight, he said. But that doesn't mean I came here to stay silent. The room breathed with him. No music swelled. No cue was given. But the tension that had coiled itself around the edges of the conversation loosened. And for the first time since he sat down, Arnold's eyes moved across the audience slowly, deliberately, not looking for applause, but for acknowledgement. And they gave it, not with claps, but with stillness. The air was dense again, not heavy with discomfort, but with recognition, like everyone in the room had suddenly remembered something they'd buried. A photo, a letter, a name they hadn't said out loud in years. No one interrupted. Even the crew backstage let the cameras run without prompting. No need to redirect. No one wanted to look away. Then a beep, barely audible, but enough to shift heads. A screen behind the stage, meant for promotional banners or sponsor graphics, flickered. A message had appeared. Black background. White text. No logo. I'm a Marine. I lost my best friend in Afghanistan. I was going to end things tonight. But watching this man talk about pain like it's not something to be ashamed of, maybe I'll wait one more day. The audience inhaled as one. Not gasping, just breathing. The kind of breath people forget they're holding. Arnold turned slowly toward the screen. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He felt it. You could see it in his posture. The shift. The stillness that carried more weight than any sound ever could. Whoopi looked up at the screen, her mouth slightly parted. All sarcasm drained from her expression. What remained was something unguarded. Something human. Arnold stood again, not for drama, but necessity. And for the first time since the show began, he didn't look around. He looked into the lens. He wasn't seeing the studio anymore. He was speaking to the room behind the room, the one only the quietest voices reach. If you're watching this, he said, steady but weighted, I don't know your name. I don't know your story. But I know what it feels like to think the pain owns a whole room. He looked at the gloves on the table, then back at the lens. You don't have to believe in me, but believe in the fact that you're still breathing. That's not nothing. He took one step forward, closing an impossible distance between him and the one who had written the message. Don't leave this world yet, he said. Not before you punch back, at least once. Silence returned. But this time it wasn't a void. It was sanctuary. Arnold didn't sit back down. He stood beside the table, one hand resting gently on the gloves, the other brushing the edge of the belt still draped across his chair. The studio was silent, not because someone asked it to be, but because no one dared interrupt what had settled in the room. Not awe, not tension. Something older than both. Reverence. No music played. No applause sign blinked. The light above the audience buzzed faintly, but even that sound felt careful now, as if the building itself understood it was no longer hosting a show. It was holding something sacred. And then, one by one, they stood. First a woman near the front. She didn't move dramatically. She just rose, arms folded tightly against her chest, as if keeping something fragile inside. Then a man 2 rows behind her followed, his hands loose by his sides, shoulders no longer tight with skepticism. And then another, and another. The ripple spread not from pressure, but from pull. They weren't rising to honor a man. They were rising because they couldn't stay seated in the presence of what they had just witnessed. No one clapped, because clapping would have broken something delicate. Arnold scanned their faces, not to gather praise, but to recognize weight. These weren't fans. They were carriers. People who knew loss. People who had buried things too heavy to name. People who now saw that grief could stand in daylight and not be mocked for showing up. Across from him, Whoopi hadn't moved. Her note card sat limp in her lap. Her hands rested gently over them, as if they no longer had any purpose. She looked at Arnold, not with resistance, not with performance, but with something slower, more complicated. Regret, maybe, or understanding. The kind that arrives late, but means it. She finally spoke, barely above a whisper. You didn't come here to win anything, did you? Arnold shook his head, once slow. No, he said. I came because somebody might be watching who needs to know they're not crazy for still feeling. No one filled the pause that followed, because nothing needed to be added. Then, as if pulled by something not rehearsed, Whoopi stood too, not to regain control, not to signal approval, but because staying seated felt dishonest now. The silence in the room wasn't awkward anymore. It was sacred, like the kind that happens in churches or hospital waiting rooms, or over the last words of someone you love. Arnold finally sat back down, not because the moment ended, but because it had landed. The gloves remained on the table, the stool in front of him. The belt is still across his knees, but they were no longer props. They were monuments to everything that had been carried, survived, and finally spoken out loud. And then the most unexpected voice broke through. Whoopi, her eyes still on the gloves, said quietly, "I didn't mean to mock you." It wasn't a performance. It wasn't for the audience. It was something stripped of armor. Arnold didn't respond right away. He looked at her, not as a host, not as an opponent, as a person, one carrying something too. "Sometimes we get so good at talking," she added, "we forget how to listen." Arnold nodded. "We all do." He reached for the belt again, rolling it gently between his fingers, not to display it, just to remember it. "You know what I realized?" he said. "It's not that people are afraid of pain. They're afraid of being the only ones feeling it." The studio didn't move. The weight of that truth was enough to hold them. "I carried my father's belt for years," he continued. "Thinking about it made me strong. But it wasn't leather. It was a memory of someone who never got to say everything he wanted to. And me, learning how to live with that." He picked up one glove. Just one. Hold it for a second, then reached across the table and placed it in front of Whoopi. She stared at it, unsure, as if he'd handed her a piece of history she hadn't earned. And maybe that was the point. "You don't have to believe what I believe," Arnold said. "Just don't laugh at what kept some of us alive." A staffer backstage wiped at their eyes. A cameraman blinked twice, adjusting the focus not because it was off, but because he couldn't see clearly anymore. Arnold stood once more, slowly, not to exit, just to look. He turned toward the audience, still standing, still silent, then gave a nod, so small it almost didn't register. But it wasn't for performance. It was for presence, a gesture older than applause, a gesture that meant, "I see you." He turned back to Whoopi. "I didn't come here to be understood," he said. "I came to remind people it's okay to feel, even when the world tells you not to." Then he walked, not dramatically, just purposefully, past the table, past the chairs, past the cameras, into the space between spotlight and shadow. And just before he reached the edge of the stage, without turning around, he said, "Sometimes you don't need to win the round. You just need to stay standing." The screen faded. No otro. No sponsors. Just one final image. The gloves on the table. And below them, a single line of text. "Strength isn't loud. It endures."